Imagine you're a biologist, right? And you take an American alligator and you inject it with, like, 200 times the lethal dose of bacteria for a mouse.
You'd probably brace yourself for a massive biological freakout.
Exactly. You'd expect a huge fever, intense inflammation, the animal just thrashing around, burning immense amounts of energy to fight off the infection.
Right, but that is actually not what happens at all.
No. Its heart rate stays completely flat. Its oxygen consumption actually drops.
Yeah, and the only major change is its fecal output, which just skyrockets by 2,100 times in just a few hours.
It's wild. The alligator doesn't fight the chaos by burning extra energy. It just rescales itself to the chaos. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone.
We have an incredibly dense, fascinating stack of sources for you today.
We really do. We are unpacking this densely theoretical framework called CESM. That stands for the critical equilibrium of adaptive self-maintaining systems.
Or, in slightly more approachable terms, the critical edge of active self-modeling. It is a pretty heavy title for a framework that combines advanced theoretical physics, mathematics, biology, you name it. But the core of it is profoundly grounded in everyday human survival.
Yeah, and alongside the physics papers, we are looking at this deeply personal playbook written by a man named Joshua Aaron Chamont-Terziu.
Plus some really rigorous historical analyses of Acadian and Cajun history by scholars like Farragher, Rushton, Bernard, and Sturgis.
Exactly. And the mission of this deep dive is to explore how these universal laws of physics and mathematics aren't just, abstract ideas trapped on a chalkboard.
Right. They are highly practical.
Yeah. We're going to look at how these exact scientific principles were the literal mechanisms that Joshua used to survive a brutally chaotic childhood.
And then we'll zoom out to see how those exact same principles scale up to explain the survival of an entire culture.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand CEASM, we have to start at the individual level, right?
Right.
We need to look at the extreme environment that forced Joshua to create this active self-modeling playbook in the first place.
Right, so we have to look at Joshua's starting conditions, which were just incredibly harsh. He grew up in Southwest Louisiana.
Yeah.
And his parents were deeply struggling with addiction and, co-occurring mental illness.
Which is already so...
Totally. And he never even met his ex-Marine father. His mother was just completely gone from his life by the time he turned 7.
Which is heartbreaking on a human level.
Yeah.
But when you filter that childhood through the lens of this physics framework, you realize he was actually trapped in an extreme physical state.
Yeah. In the terminology of CEASM, Joshua was shoved entirely into what they call the wild explore side.
The wild explore side.
Right. In physics, this is called a supercritical regime. So think of an engine where the throttle is jammed wide open and all the stabilizing components have just been stripped away.
Just pure chaos.
Exactly. Pure chaos, high entropy, a complete lack of stable structure. Now, mathematically and biologically, when a finite system is trapped in a supercritical regime like that, it usually suffers one of two fates.
Right.
It either dissipates completely.
Meaning the person just falls apart, right? They get consumed by the chaos.
Exactly. Or the system swings aggressively into the exact opposite extreme. It becomes this isolated, rigid crystal state. It locks down into hyper-control just to compensate for the terror of all that surrounding noise.
But Joshua didn't dissipate, and he didn't become an isolated crystal either.
No, he didn't.
And that's really the core of his playbook. He engaged in what the framework calls active self-modeling.
Yeah.
He essentially had to build his own internal steering wheel from scratch. He was constantly balancing the pull toward order, forcing himself to do his homework, showing up, washing his own clothes.
Right, the basic survival stuff.
Yeah, but balancing that with the pull toward possibility, which means keeping future paths open and not just collapsing into despair or rigid routines.
Exactly.
It's like being thrown into the deep end of a pool with absolutely no swimming lessons, and instead of just flailing around or sinking, you invent fluid dynamics in your head just to survive the afternoon.
That is a perfect analogy, actually. The mathematics of fluid dynamics is a great parallel here, because what Joshua was doing was actively operating a criticality servo under extreme noise.
A criticality servo. Break that down for us.
Sure. So in engineering, a servo is a control mechanism that constantly corrects errors to keep a machine on its intended path. Like if a drone is hit by a gust of wind, the servo adjusts the rotors to keep it level.
Got it.
Joshua's doing this in his own developing brain, just constantly course-correcting between completely shutting down and spinning totally out of control.
But how does a child manage this? Like, Without a parent modeling it for them, kids learn emotional regulation by watching the adults around them.
Usually, yeah.
So if the adults are the actual source of the chaos, where does the baseline even come from?
Well, the framework answers this by pointing to the hard limits of the universe itself. Specifically, it introduces the universal incompleteness principle, drawing really heavily on Wolpert's limit.
Wolpert's limit, okay.
Yeah, David Wolpert is a mathematician who formally proved that no inference device inside the universe can predict everything about the universe in models.
So a part cannot fully compute the whole.
Exactly. And Joshua was living this axiom every single day. He couldn't predict if his mom would come back. He couldn't predict if his family would ever stabilize.
The variables were literally incomputable.
Exactly. So instead of trying to predict the unpredictable, he turned to the one thing that offered concrete rules.
Mathematics.
Yes. The sources note he got a general studies degree with a concentration in math. And his math degree was really his way of building what CESM calls compressive models.
A compressive model.
Right. If the universe gives you, say, 10,000 chaotic data points a second, a compressive model lets you identify the 3 that actually matter.
So you keep those and throw the rest of the junk away.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That's how you navigate a world that is inherently irreducible and undecidable.
And what's fascinating is that this compression isn't just a mental exercise. The CESM framework emphasizes that navigating chaos is deeply physical.
Highly physical.
Joshua was a first-team all-district defensive end in American football, and the framework maps this physical experience using a mathematical parameter called ES, right?
Right, which represents a system's distance from chaos.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because playing defensive end is the literal physical embodiment of this ES parameter. Let's break down the math of ES real quick.
Sure, so if the ES parameter is too negative, the system favors free energy minimization.
Meaning it seeks order, safety, and predictability above everything else.
Right. But if the ES parameter is too positive, the system favors path entropy maximization. It chases chaos, exploration, wild divergence.
So optimal survival happens when ES is hovering right near zero, vibrating exactly at the critical edge between the two.
Exactly.
Let me translate that to the physical reality of the football field for you. If you're a defensive end, and your ES parameter is too negative, meaning you crave too much order, you crash inside toward the center to find the ball immediately.
And you lose containment.
Exactly. You lose containment, and the running back sweeps right past you on the outside. But if your ES is too positive and you give into the chaos, you sprint wildly upfield, you fly right past the quarterback.
You lose gap integrity, and the play cuts right underneath you.
Right. You have to live exactly at the critical edge. You hold your ground, read the tackle, and keep your options alive so you can react to a run, a pass, or a reverse.
And Joshua was physically practicing the regulation of his own mind's criticality on the football field long before he ever had the mathematical vocabulary to describe it. He was basically training his nervous system to sit comfortably at the edge of the unknown.
But doing that all by yourself, I mean, constantly acting as your own servo, constantly holding the edge against all that chaos that has to be biologically exhausting.
Oh, it's entirely unsustainable for a single human over a lifetime. Surviving alone at the critical edge burns immense amounts of energy.
Yeah, I would imagine.
In physics, when a finite system tries to manage that much entropy on its own, it inevitably risks thermal runaway. The engine gets too hot, the coolant boils off, and the system melts down.
So to avoid thermal runaway, a system must couple with another system. It has to share the load.
Exactly.
Which brings us right back to our alligator. An alligator can rescale its biology and dump its waste to survive a temporary lethal injection. But Joshua had to survive a lifetime.
Right. He needed an external system to help him regulate.
And the human equivalent of this rescaling, this coupling to avoid thermal runaways, was his marriage of over 20 years.
Yes. And the playbook is incredibly precise about the mechanics of this relationship. It's important to note his wife didn't fix him.
Right, because fixing implies taking a broken machine and returning it to this static, finished state.
Exactly. What they built was a collaborative dyadic regulation system. They learned to meet at what CESM calls the self-sustaining horizon, or the SSH.
The SSH?
Yeah, this is described as a shared zero curvature point where gain equals loss.
Okay, hold on. I need to push back on this terminology just a bit.
Sure, go ahead.
Because zero curvature point where gain equals loss sounds a lot like astrophysics, not marriage counseling.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like in a living room on a Tuesday night? Because usually when we talk about a couple sharing the load and understanding each other on a deep level, we just call that empathy. And we tend to think of empathy as knowing exactly what the other person is feeling, like mind reading almost.
Well, the framework actually explicitly rejects that mind-reading definition of empathy. And it again relies on a physical limit, specifically Wolfram's computational irreducibility limit.
Okay, break that down for us.
Stephen Wolfram's work suggests that you cannot fully compute or simulate the internal state of another complex system. It is mathematically impossible for a human brain to perfectly simulate another human brain.
So empathy in the CASM framework cannot be mind reading.
Exactly. Joshua describes it instead as co-sampling the snap.
Co-sampling the snap? Oh, like a defensive tackle and a defensive end? Hearing the quarterback's cadence and hitting the gap at the exact same millisecond.
Without having to turn and talk to each other.
Right.
That is exactly the mechanism. It's a shared interior measurement. You and your partner lock into a rhythm together. Yep. You're experiencing the same environmental pressure. You process it at the same speed, and you react as a unified front.
Wow.
You share a moment of flat curvature, a moment where neither of you is dominating or collapsing.
You achieve joint coherence without ever having to perfectly simulate what the other person is actually thinking.
Precisely. And that dyadic regulation is what allowed Joshua to shift from this competitive, energy-burning survival state to a cooperative, sustainable one.
Okay, so he stabilizes himself through this dyadic regulation with his wife. The thermal runaway is averted. But then, the mission shift.
Right, because Joshua is now a poor, homeschooling father of 3 in Southwest Louisiana.
So the problem is no longer just surviving himself. It's about transmitting that stability to the next generation.
And in the CASM framework, fatherhood is defined mathematically as a hierarchical stack of controllers.
I love this concept.
Yeah. Children, just by their nature, operate with fast rhythms. They're erratic, high energy, constantly probing their environment. So Joshua's role is to act as the steady, slow controller beneath those fast rhythms.
And the playbook uses 2 very specific terms for this, right? Kappa and mu.
Yes. Kappa represents the calm down pull, the restorative force, and mu represents the slow body fuel, the raw energy required for baseline functioning.
So in real-world parenting, providing Kappa means being that immovable anchor of calm. It's enforcing consistent bedtimes, making sure dinner happens, or, crucially, taking a deep breath and lowering your voice when your kid is having a meltdown instead of yelling back.
Exactly. And providing mu means ensuring they have the physical nutrition and sleep they need.
Right. So by providing that steady, slow bottom layer, the father allows his kids to safely take fast excursions out to the wild explore side to learn and play, knowing their baseline is completely secured.
But the temptation for any parent who has survived chaos is to overmanage their children to protect them.
Oh, absolutely.
But the framework introduces Theorem 2.2, which is perfect control severs coupling.
Okay, for anyone listening who is a parent, a manager, or honestly just someone trying to help a friend grow, what a massive relief. The physics literally proves that trying to perfectly manage another human being breaks your connection with them.
It does. If you try to eliminate all the noise, predict every behavior, protect your children from every possible error, you just become one of those rigid, isolated crystals we talked about earlier.
You sever the joint horizon.
Yes. You stop co-sampling the snap. So what Joshua aims for instead is a messy, subcritical hovering.
Subcritical hovering. I love that so much. You hover just below the edge of chaos.
Right. You allow the system to have jitter. You let your kids make mistakes, spill the milk, solve their own minor disputes.
Because a system that is slightly imperfect and jittery retains the flexibility to adapt.
Exactly. When a real crisis hits, a jittery system can shift its weight. A perfectly rigid system just shatters.
Man, that is so powerful. Okay, so we've seen how CASM works for one man. How he built a criticality servo to survive a brutal childhood, found thermal stability in his marriage, and uses subcritical hovering to raise his kids.
Right.
Let's zoom out now. What happens when an entire society loses this balance? And what does a healthy CASM-aligned community actually look like historically?
Well, the sources make a rather blistering critique of modern societal structures here. The framework argues that modern human management is completely antithetical to optimal human functioning.
Completely antithetical.
Yes. Because when a society treats people as statistical averages and outsources their judgment, safety, and prediction to central authorities or algorithms, it strips the local nodes, the individuals, of their moral responsibility and their ability to adapt.
Yeah, the playbook actually references how modern centralized schooling often teaches what are known as the 7 hidden lessons. Things like profound confusion, emotional dependency, provisional self-esteem, constant surveillance.
Right. These systems intentionally lock populations into isolated crystal states. They keep people in high stress but low exploration.
But Joshua's ancestry actually offers a historical blueprint for the exact opposite of that.
It does.
He comes from Acadian and Cajun roots, and the historical sources show that between 1604 and 1713, the Acadians living around the Bay of Fundy built a society that functioned as a massive, physicalized model of distributed community sensing.
Yeah. The Acadian model was fundamentally built on a core value of neutrality and mutual aid. Their motto was basically trade, not raid.
Trade, not raid.
Right. And geographically, they structured their society to maintain this. They held land in what were called long lots. Yeah, these narrow strips of land running back from the river, ensuring that every single family had equal access to the marsh, the upland woods, and the water. They didn't rely on central lords or distant kings to manage their environment at all.
The communal dikes are the perfect example of this distributed sensing, actually. They built these massive earthen walls with wooden valves to reclaim farmland from the sea.
Right.
And the decision of when to open or close the valves or when to repair the dikes wasn't made by some bureaucrat far away. It was decided through local parish assemblies by the people actually standing in the mud.
Exactly. They relied on a practice called échange du temps, which translates to the exchange of time.
The exchange of time.
Yeah, it was a system of labor exchanges for critical infrastructure like house raisings, dike building, harvesting. The community functioned as a massive dyadic regulation system, absorbing chaos and sharing the energy load together.
And they took the concept of entropy cycling incredibly seriously. Honestly, my favorite detail from the sources is Lord de Bonton.
Oh, the Order of Good Times.
Yes. Founded by Samuel de Champlain in 1606.
It sounds like a frivolous social club, honestly,
Yeah.
but it was a crucial survival mechanism.
Exactly. It wasn't just a nightly party, it was a highly structured weekly feast. The men rotated daily hunting and gathering duties to ensure the community had fresh meat, which actually prevented scurvy during those brutal winters.
Right.
And they often invited the local Micmac people to join them. This was deliberate entropy cycling at a societal level. They used ritualized sharing, food, music to keep exploration, joy, and social connection alive when the environment outside was quite literally trying to freeze them to death.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, unfortunately, that model of local distributed sovereignty clashed violently with the demands of centralized empire.
Yeah.
This brings the historical analysis to the 1755 Grand Arrangement, the expulsion of the Acadians by the British.
Right.
And relying strictly on the historical facts documented by scholars like Farragher and Sturgis, the British authorities demanded that the Acadians sign an unconditional oath of allegiance.
And the Acadians refused.
Yes, they insisted on maintaining their neutrality. So in response, the British military systematically burned Acadian villages, destroyed the communal dikes, confiscated livestock.
It's awful.
Roughly 11,000 Acadians were deported and scattered across the globe. And historians estimate that about half of them died from disease, malnutrition, or exposure during the expulsion.
It's a staggering historical tragedy. And the sources note that this event was finally acknowledged in 2003 when Queen Elizabeth II's government issued a formal proclamation expressing regret for the expulsion and its consequences.
Right.
Now, we're obviously not taking any political stances on centuries-old colonial conflicts here, but viewing this strictly through the lens of our physics framework. The Grand Arrangement was the physical destruction of a working, highly efficient model of local embodied sovereignty.
Exactly. The central authority shattered the local nodes.
But the Acadian culture didn't dissipate.
No, it didn't. The survivors who eventually made their way to Spanish Louisiana, becoming the Cajuns, they rebuilt their networks, and they practiced what the framework calls embodied sovereignty.
Embodied sovereignty.
Yeah. Decades later, in the 1940s, when speaking French was strictly banned in Louisiana classrooms and children were literally punished for using their native tongue.
The Cajun people didn't riot, but they also didn't comply.
Exactly. They preserved the language in their kitchens. They maintained their communal gatherings, their music, their foodways.
They proved that sovereignty isn't a piece of paper granted by a state capital. Sovereignty is maintained through daily, stubborn refusal and shared responsibility.
Yes.
It's the Acadian long lots and communal dikes manifesting invisibly at a societal scale. You own what you work, and your neighbors help you defend it because they are an active part of your dyadic regulatory system.
Absolutely.
So we've gone from a chaotic childhood to the physics of football to the historical resilience of the Cajuns. Let's bring this right to the present day. How do you, the listener, apply this massive framework? What does a peak human experience actually look like in the modern world, according to CASM?
Well, the sources outline a vision that combines a therapeutic lifestyle with what they call an optimal public utility grid.
Okay, an optimal public utility grid.
Yeah. The peak human experience described here is essentially a return to homesteading, but heavily augmented with high-tech feedback loops and this CEASM mathematical framework.
So it's about moving forward intelligently and not just regressing to the Stone Age.
Exactly. And it starts with the biological mechanics of the brain.
Specifically, it focuses on the brain's parietal rhythm.
Yes.
Yeah.
The parietal rhythm acts as an internal master clock for how your brain integrates sensory signals from the outside world. And the framework suggests that you can actively tune this rhythm. Yeah. If you engage in practices that tune that rhythm to around 8 hertz, you widen your window for joint experience. You become more open to emotional connection, shared realities, and just taking in the big picture.
Okay, and what if you go the other way?
Conversely, if you tune it closer to 13 hertz, you narrow that window, which gives you sharp, isolated, highly focused boundaries.
So how do you actually tune it? You do it through what the playbook calls deliberate entropy cycling. You don't just sit in an office chair under fluorescent lights for 10 hours a day. You cycle your states.
Why?
You do focused work, which is low chaos, high order, reducing error. That gets you closer to the 13 hertz focus. Then you deliberately break that state and cycle into open awareness and physical movement.
You explore, you sweat, you engage with nature.
Exactly. And then you ground the whole cycle with proper sunlight exposure and deep sleep. Those act as the boundary conditions that let your biological water films and internal cellular rhythms actually stabilize.
And this personal biological cycling is then designed to be paired with a futuristic civic network, that utility grid we mentioned.
Right.
The vision here is a total departure from modern social media or tech platforms. Instead of having your attention harvested by algorithms that treat you as a statistical average to be farmed for ad revenue, the grid is designed for joint coherence.
The phrasing they use is that you lease your location, your free time, and your thinking traces, which, I'll admit, sounds a little dystopian until you unpack what it actually means.
Right. Think of it as verifiable proof of your localized work. Instead of giving your data away to a central authority, you own your data.
Yeah.
You share the trace of your problem solving, your community labor, or your creative output with the grid, and you earn credit for the actual integration and coherence you create in your local community.
The system pays you for maintaining the health of the local node. It basically treats you like a co-author of society.
Exactly. It's the Acadian échange de temps, updated for the digital age. You are trading time and effort, and the ledger is completely transparent and locally beneficial.
The entire framework ultimately raises a pretty profound question about how we define a good life. In CASM, true health is never defined as just the absence of disease. And a good life is absolutely not about avoiding stress entirely.
So what does this all mean?
It means optimal human functioning is about maintaining a living boundary that can take a punch, absorb a challenge, rescale just like the alligator, and keep future paths open. It's about fighting the urge to collapse into rigid, terrified order while also refusing to dissipate into pure chaos.
It is the daily physical practice of visiting the critical edge, gaining insight from the noise, and returning to a steady baseline.
Man, what an incredible arc we've covered today. We started with a 7-year-old boy in Louisiana trying to survive the chaos of addiction and absence. We mapped that survival onto the hard mathematical limits of human knowledge, American football, and the bizarre resilience of alligator biology. We traced those exact same principles through the ethnic cleansing of Acadia and the stubborn survival of the Cajun people in their kitchens. And we landed on a literal, physical playbook for optimal living, from tuning your brainwaves to envisioning a futuristic public grid that rewards real community connection.
And the common denominator running through every single one of those examples is the absolute necessity of active self-modeling.
Right.
Whether you are a defensive end, a homeschooling father, or an Acadian farmer, You cannot passively wait for stability to find you.
Exactly. And for you, the listener, the takeaway is profoundly empowering. Just like Joshua, you are embedded in a noisy, fundamentally uncertain universe. The universe is never going to hand you perfect balance. You have to actively build your own internal servo. You have to steer yourself to that critical edge every single day.
Because no algorithm and no central authority can do it for you.
They really can't. And that brings me to a final thought for you to mull over. If mathematical incompleteness guarantees that no one can ever fully predict the future or perfectly compute what's going on inside another human being's head, then maybe our ultimate superpower as a species isn't our raw intelligence or our ability to control our environment. Maybe our superpower is our capacity to stand right at the edge of the unknown, hold hands with someone else, and simply share the noise. What if the parts of your life that feel the most chaotic, the most like a storm you can't possibly control, are actually the exact raw materials you need to build your own self-sustaining horizon? You don't need a heavier anchor, you just need to learn the physics of the water.